Everybody says they do it and nobody does this. Everything is a team effort. None of this was just done by me. There are what I call SEO aggregators and SEO integrators. Both of these types of sites scale with fundamentally different tools. If you only focus on quick wins, then at some point they run out. I'm talking to the people who are responsible for the fundamentals and I see how they think and operate. We don't think we have the right people. The team is just not operating the way they could be or should be. But what else we could do? Leadership is either scared to pull the trigger or they want perfect predictability. What would it take to make the decision? What information do you need to make a call here? At some point, you just delay execution and you operate too slowly because you're trying to make a perfect decision. But there is no more is to just hide behind perfection and say, hey, if we're not confident that this is going to work, we're not going to do it because that company cannot execute quickly anymore and not take risks, right? So these types of insights wrapped in a good story with good visualizations work like a charm. Very different quality. So who says something and how they describe their experience matters tremendously these days. That's why it's so important to talk to your target audience or prospects. I'm telling you, everybody who listens to this, you're probably not doing customer research and they're probably not talking to your customers.
Changing that team dynamic, letting people go and hiring new people to do new roles, but we've got to adapt or die.
Key is to think about what are the paid, earned, and owned channels, and how can I make my life easier by creating content once and then repurposing it across the board. Whether you are active on Reddit or not, there is a chance that your product is being discussed. That's what Google pays, and a lot of that goes to Apple just to be the pre-installed solution. 100 choices to make, and each of them could be the one choice that they made wrong that then means that they lose the race.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Want to attract and convert more leads? Want to learn how digital PR, branding, and SEO can establish and build your brand identity? Welcome to the Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkify podcast. We answer these questions and help you ramp up your brand visibility and credibility. Let's cut through the noise and make your business the talk of the town. We're your hosts, Nick and Chris. Let's get this show on the road.
Welcome to the Market Movers podcast. Today we are joined by the great Kevin Indig, an SEO luminary who has driven growth for industry leaders like Shopify, Atlassian, and G2. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks for having me. Fun to be on.
Kevin, it's great to have you on. Just to start, you've worked with some really big companies. Why don't you just walk us through your journey and how you got into SEO?
Okay. I'll try to keep this under 3 minutes. There's a lot to say, lots of stories to tell, but super long story short, I was born and raised in Germany. When I was a teenager, broadband internet became available, affordable, became a thing in Europe. And I was an avid gamer. I played Counter-Strike, StarCraft, Warcraft, Diablo, all the good stuff. And I would play with friends in a group, in a clan, and then we'd play online. We applied for online tournaments and we needed a website. And so I somehow became the guy to figure out how to get us a website. I taught myself some very scrappy HTML, CSS, Photoshop. I kind of stitched together websites, first for us and then, for quote unquote clients. It was terrible. It was really, really bad, but somehow some people paid me a little bit of money. And that then evolved into, discovering this thing that's called Google and search engines and getting curious about that. And so for a couple of years, I just read stuff in forums and I tinkered a little bit, nothing too serious. And then after college, super long story short, I had the opportunity to start at an agency as a trainee. That agency luckily was consulting enterprise clients and really tried to, position itself as sort of like a McKinsey in SEO. So wearing suits, or, really dapper. And that long story short, I had 5 years on the agency side. Then I got an opportunity to move to the States. Search Metrics, specifically Marcus Tober, gave me the opportunity. So moved over to Silicon Valley, spent about, 8-9 years there at various companies. As you mentioned, Atlassian, G2, Shopify. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been an advisor, so single person company, so to say, working with still large tech companies. We have Ramp in there, Reddit, Meta, Snap, Hims, Toast, Dropbox. So usually large tech companies and very much on the strategic side now.
Oh, that's awesome. So you just naturally progressed into this unbelievable career or was it like a gaming forum site that you launched? Yeah,
exactly. It was a very simple clan site. So just like hey, here's who we are and what games we play, as simple as you can imagine. But you needed that to apply for the tournament back in the day. So yeah, I somehow figured that out and it triggered a bunch of stuff.
Does the site still exist? Does it still rank?
Oh no. It's been off for a long time, and it's good. Good this way.
That's awesome. Okay, so yeah, you mentioned Shopify. You managed to achieve some remarkable organic growth over at Shopify. Could you share your approach to scaling SEO for a company such as Shopify?
Yeah, totally. Of course, first I have to say everything is a team effort, right? Like this, none of this was just done by me, but I was responsible for a pretty large organization. I think at the peak it was about 100 people, and we would do anything from SEO to conversion, email, academy, some product-led growth things, so incentivizing merchants to refer their friends. But from an SEO perspective specifically, my framework is that there are two types of websites. There are what I call SEO aggregators and SEO integrators. The aggregators are typically the large sites. We're talking about e-commerce retailers, consumer marketplaces. Think about a Udemy, an Uber Eats, DoorDash, review sites like TripAdvisor, right? They're all really large sites. They scale pages on a few templates up into the millions, And then the opposite of that are SEO integrators, and they don't really have an easy way to scale the number of pages. That's typically when we talk about SaaS companies for the most part. In e-commerce, this would be direct to consumer businesses. I would also categorize affiliates and publishers in that same vein. So both of these types of sites scale with fundamentally different tools. When we talk about SEO integrators, your arsenal typically covers stuff like the blog or content hubs, lead generation tools, and then maybe some semi-scalable things like an academy, for example, And so at Shopify, our lead generation tools were of huge importance to us. They drove a lot of business. And we're talking about things like a business name generator, a logo maker, a domain name finder, right? Those kind of tools that do jobs for our target audience. They drove a massive business impact. And then around that, you structure stuff like blog content, landing pages. Those also matter, but it's a bit less targeted, especially when we talk about blog content. And so scale for us really meant more content, more tools, long tail pages, right? So a business name generator is obviously super important, but you can also create landing pages specifically on the types of businesses. So a shirt business name generator, a candle business name generator, a t-shirt, all this kind of different stuff. And so that's what scale meant for us. Then there's also the scale aspect of international, of course. Our Shopify SEO team was around 25 people. Again, depends on the time you look at, but part of that was international SEO managers. So people who are native in a language, who understand the market deeply, who coordinate market activities or marketing activities. And so there's different ways and avenues to scale at Shopify, but fundamentally important is to understand that this is an SEO integrator. So you cannot approach SEO the same way you would approach it at, say, TripAdvisor or Trello. It's a very different approach.
Okay, I think that kind of alters my next question. I was going to ask, we had someone on recently who said that enterprise SEO is really about the fundamentals, that a lot of the growth tactics, the growth hacks that work for smaller websites don't really work on the enterprise level. And I'm curious if you agree or disagree with that statement. And I know that might vary between the two types of sites you described.
Very much agree. Very much agree. I think, it's critical. Like there's no one SEO, right? There's lots of different SEOs, not just in terms of the maybe size of the website, but then also the vertical, right? So news SEO, very different from e-commerce, very different from SaaS in terms of the approach, but also in terms of how the search results look, right? Look at the SERPs and look at the SERP features. Very, very different landscape from across all these verticals. And then there's also the aspect of company size or maturity. Startup, very different than a large enterprise side. In the startup, you might be talking about doing things in days. At a large enterprise, we're talking about quarters, right? You spend a lot more time getting alignment and getting everybody on the same page, and then, the ship moves. So SEO, very multifaceted, very diverse in the terms of problem sets. And I'm often missing that nuance in the public discourse where it's like, oh yeah, SEO is links and content and, maybe user experience. Okay, cool. Those are like that's the fundamental building block of the DNA. But, are we talking about a man or a woman or a child, or like what's the situation here? What's the context?
Yeah. And actually we had Sam Page on, who was the head of SEO at Slack. And one of the interesting things that he talked about, which I think is a fascinating component of enterprise SEO, is how difficult it can be to push things through. And so he talked about quick wins. So I'm interested, for someone leading SEO at a large scale company, company. What are the biggest opportunities for quick wins, which obviously have the added advantage that you can leverage the existing authority of the website and you can have an initial impact, but also you've got easier implementation and less red tape to get through to sort of make those early changes?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I also had that experience that you essentially want to juggle quick wins with longer term plays. If you only focus on quick wins, then at some point they run out and you're like, okay, now I need to scramble and get buy-in for like a longer, bigger term project. And that's really hard. But at the same time, if you only focus on the long term, then at some point your managers are getting antsy. And so, the question is, how do you balance that? And in terms of quick wins, a lot of stuff you often see, especially at enterprise or larger companies, is fundamentals. So, our landing page is not having the main keyword it's targeting in the title. Or, this country has a faulty canonical or hreflang set up, like very, very basic stuff. So it's really good to come into a new role at such a company and say, okay, in the first 90 days, I'm going to just seek maybe, 3 or 5 quick wins with a very basic approach, nail that approach down and then delegate it to someone else, just to kind of prove yourself and get a bit of credibility. But then I think one of the hardest tasks in-house, especially as a leader, is to get the sequencing right between different sizes of projects across different time horizons. So what are the things we're doing the next quarter? What are the things we're doing next year? What are the things we're doing next 3 years? How can I get buy-in from those for those? And then which projects do I pick? Because there's usually many things you can do. So there's usually a lot of circling around the opportunity size, the right priorities, the right reasons, and that takes a lot of energy and time. But I found that once you lock that in, once you get that right, then it's only, quote unquote, only about executing. And executing is its own kind of challenge, right? But if you fail at the aiming part, if you don't get the strategy right or the plan, then everything else doesn't matter, right? You can be the best technical expert in the world, know the best hacks, or have the best connections to the industry. If you don't get buy-in for your plan and for your strategy, everything else falters. And that's by the way, why I focus on strategy right now as an advisor, because I've taken so many punches that I've developed some good reflexes.
When you first sit down and talk with a new company and they're telling you their goals, what is that conversation like? Are you just, if you say like, we're going to focus on the fundamentals, we're going to fix these easy things, are they not like furious at their SEO team that they've, not optimized their landing pages? Because a lot of that is very basic. So how does that conversation usually go?
Yeah, I try to operate more on the meta level. So instead of coming in and scanning the site for the fundamentals, I'm talking to the people who are responsible for the fundamentals and I see how they think and operate. And that's the bigger thing to catch, right? So if they miss out on like a workflow that's super important, or they don't think about the problem at hand the right way, then I can come in and say, look, this is maybe a better blueprint or a better framework for how I approach this. And then it takes care of itself, so I don't have to come in and crawl the site or do all these checks. I quote unquote teach it to the people who should be doing it, and that has a bigger impact for the client as well, right? Because they're not dependent on me anymore. But generally the conversation looks like, what is the goal of the problem? Where are you today? And sometimes clients just say, hey, come in and see what we could do better. And then it's essentially like a car shop process where I open the hood, I see on everything that's going on. How do they set targets? How do they achieve targets? How do they hire? How do they design their organization? How do they execute, right? How do they plan? Is all these kind of things that I did and learned at other companies. But much more often it is a specific problem. And there's different categories of problems. One is we are not hitting our targets. We're falling short. Why is that? Another problem is we don't think we have the right people. So very often you'll have a CMO or a leader sensing that the team is just not operating the way they could be or should be. And then other times it's like, hey, we're doing really well and we are wondering about what else we could do. And those are some of the most fun conversations to have because you can ideate, you can brainstorm, you can see what other companies doing in the same space or similar companies doing in other spaces, and you can think about big swings. So I think that's usually the most impactful situation, but there also are these situations where things are dragging and they need to get the car out of the ditch, and so we're figuring out how.
Yeah, I think timescale is, like I said, is a fascinating part of enterprise. Do you find that it can be a detriment to your abilities to execute plans if you have senior leadership taking too long to buy in on ideas and give the green light on plans?
Very much so. And it's a very underrated problem, right? So I've experienced this myself, and I experience this a lot with my clients where leadership is either scared to pull the trigger or they want perfect predictability. And so what I often bring to the table, as basic as that sounds, is to just push towards a decision. To just come in and say, okay, we need to make a call on this. We cannot circle forever. So first of all, let's time box it. Let's say until when we make the decision. And two, what would it take to make the decision? What information do you need to make a call here, right? Is it an opportunity size? Is it a level of confidence? Is it a level of detail? Is it like showcasing how this has worked before? Is it a certain person who needs to be responsible for this and be on the hook for this? I've been in that place, and that's why I can relate to it so much. It is very scary sometimes to make a call because we're dealing with a lot of imperfect information, and you're on the hook for this, right? Like if this project goes south or you're under deliver, then that's bad news for your career. And it's a lot of people. It seems very, very shallow, but a lot of people take this as, maybe I can't find another job. Maybe I get fired. Maybe my reputation is damaged. Maybe I have trouble saving for my kids' college, right? So these are deep-rooted fears, and it helps to have an outside advisor like myself in there to not just provide another level of confidence and scrutiny, but also to then say, okay, look, I think we have all the information that we can get. We can send the team back for another week to do even more research and consider even more possibilities, but this is not going to increase the confidence in our decision. And so at Shopify, we had this saying that 70% of information is enough. Because at some point, to what you mentioned, Chris, at some point you just delay execution and you operate too slowly because you're trying to make a perfect decision, but there is no more ground to be gained. And so it's a trade-off between speed and predictability.
So you mentioned some of the clients that they're doing well, they've got all the fundamentals down, and that's really the fun jobs where you get to figure out like what are the things you could focus on. What are the other big kind of ideas that you see in enterprise? You mentioned tools a couple times. Can you talk about how tools work for lead gen, and then maybe any other big ideas that you like?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you an example. I worked with the team at Ramp for a whole year. Ramp is one of the fastest growing fintech startups in history. They're doing exceptionally well. And one thing that is a key to their success is execution speed. The team just deliver very, very quickly. They don't circle around too much, right? They much rather get something on the street, see how it does, and iterate, which is my preferred approach as well. And so one thing that we built at Ramp was the mission statement generator. It's essentially just a landing page where you can come to and you get different ideas for mission statements. And it was kind of an idea that was a bit out there when we got to it. We weren't very confident that it would drive business, but it does drive a lot of business, surprisingly. And it's because apparently when founders or business owners are at a stage where they think about a mission statement, they also need a business credit card and a business accounting solution and expense management, all that kind of stuff. So it was a really good fit. We built this thing in half a day, very scrappy, a small team. And the benefit is that the mission statement generator allows you to do the job instead of teaching you about it. So blog content or any content, right, is educating people in doing something, but a lead generation tool allows them to do it on the spot. That is a big advantage. And that's also why Google will always rank it above any types of content. So the way that works is essentially you come to the site or to the landing page, you get a lot of ideas, and then at some point you're prompted for an email sign up. And if you're a good fit, then a team will reach out to you and probably sell you on Ramp. And so you can develop lead generation tools for all sorts of use cases. What's important is to have a way to quickly stand these prototypes up, right? If it takes you quarters or maybe even just 1 quarter to get this out, then you're probably moving too slow, right? So Ramp did this basically within a day. We want to validate that this works. And I'll also say that we developed some lead generation tools that didn't have an impact and we took them down again, right? So this can also happen, but you need to get them out quickly to validate the use case. And then over time, you can figure out how to introduce more friction to sign up more people, right? So when do you gate it? When do you ask people for the email? And when do you give them quote unquote free stuff as a value? So there's a balance there. But long story short, way too many enterprise companies are undervaluing and investing in lead generation tools. And even if you don't have dedicated engineers, these days you can build them with third-party solutions, right? So you can invest some money to create this almost self-serve. And especially with AI, you can build little applications very, very quickly with the right talent. So I don't think there are many excuses to not invest in lead generation tools. It's more often a fear of internal engineering teams or product teams who are afraid of too many dependencies or liabilities. But again, this as a leader is a trade-off you have to manage. Do you want business impact or do you want, as little dependencies as possible? And there's no perfect answer, right? It's a trade-off you have to make.
Yeah. Also as well, it's much lower risk, isn't it? Like you just said, the Ramp launched a number of tools that just didn't work. They just took them down. So it's got to be an easier thing to test and try than, I don't know, doing a mass redirect project on existing URLs or pruning content or something like that. So it's definitely got to be worth the risk, hasn't it?
Usually, yes, absolutely. And again, it goes back to a philosophy, which is to quickly ship and then iterate towards the ideal. What's easy in B2B is to just hide behind perfection and say, hey, if we're not confident that this is going to work, we're not going to do it. And that's usually why you see a lot of companies doing really, really well in that growth stage after product market fit, where they still execute like a startup, but they just grow to the size of an enterprise. But then when you see, when companies hit a certain level, they get much more quote unquote complacent and risk averse, and that then slows execution down. And then along comes a new competitor who still operates at that growth stage and takes them over because that company cannot execute quickly anymore and not take risks, right? So, again, like it's very easy to be risk averse, but risk and taking big swings is what catapults companies forward and what also allows them to create competitive advantages. But it lives in a zone of discomfort, and that's the challenge.
Just one question, because you've talked about tools quite a lot, and I think that's really, really interesting. From your experience, would you say that you are seeing more of a significant ROI from ranking lead gen tools organically compared to that of the collective organic reach of the informational blog content on a website?
Blog content has its space. It has its position in space. It can also serve as a way to pre-validate a lead generation tool. So say you're really struggling to invest in this and you don't, for whatever reason, you don't want to do it without more information. Then one thing you can do is you can write a blog article about the topic, maybe fire some paid search on it to accelerate the process, and then see what are the returns. Do we get any leads from this? Do we get good user engagement? And then we can use it as a basis to make a call on developing the lead generation tool. So in the example of the mission statement generator, Ramp could have also first published a blog post about, 100 inspiring mission statements, and then maybe bid on the term, mission statement or mission statement generator, see what comes around, and then use it as a basis to make decisions. There still is a lot to be said about blog content, but content in general fundamentally shifts right now in this age of AI, right? These evergreen guides, they're losing a lot of value unless it is so central to the company that it's really in line of the core topic and mission and product. But with AI, you can get so many good answers, and you can create your own guide that this is becoming less attractive. And I see more of the content strategy going to data stories, takes, personal experience, the stuff that is harder to replicate by an AI, and where the brand or the person matters so much more. So I see that shifting, but again, it has its time and place, and I see this just as another arm of the octopus, right? So you have lead generation tools, you have content in different forms. It doesn't always have to be a blog. At Atlassian, we were very successful with content hubs that were developed or structured in a more linear way, where you take a problem from A to Z, whereas a blog is typically sorted by time, right? You have the newest content at the very top. So there's different ways to approach content as well. And then of course, some companies have an angle for programmatic SEO, which is really getting a bad rep out there, but can work really, really well. I've done it with some clients. If you do it right, Google does not punish it, and it can drive significant pipeline or business value. But yeah, it's its own kind of topic. So I see the toolbox, for B2B companies or enterprise companies having probably, like 5 good different levers that you can pull. And that in itself is a challenge. Like, how do you sequence that? Which ones do you try first? What talent do you bring on? And kind of how does that help you achieve your goals?
So let's talk more about Google and ranking blog content. What do you think is going to happen over the next few years? So if you're going on a project now, it's a company that maybe is looking to invest more in content, how would you be thinking about that? The changes that are coming and the kind of content you should be creating now?
I see 2 things that work really well. One is data stories. So what is some data? Ideally first-party data that nobody else can get, that we can use to either confirm or disconfirm an axiom. So an axiom is is a common belief in an industry. Let's just say, maybe we stick to the example of Shopify. Let's just say the common belief is that most independent merchants can't make more than $10,000. I'm just literally picking something off the air. Maybe you have a lot of data to either confirm that or to say, no, it's actually not true at all. Like it's, the majority of small merchants actually make $100,000 a year. And so these types of insights wrapped in a good story with good visualizations work like a charm. There are great companies out there that do a really good job at this. LendingTree, ZipRecruiter, Redfin, companies in different areas, they all do a really good job at telling stories with data in a very engaging way. So that kind of stuff works because nobody else has that information, and it's much more likely to be picked up by top tier media than the guide to starting an online business, which is not, it still has value, right? But it's just a very different way of getting attention. The other thing is personal experience. So imagine the founder of Shopify, Toby Lütke, writes about what it takes to start a company versus me, who has started not really a company, right? Like maybe you could say it, but not really. Very different quality. So who says something and how they describe their experience matters tremendously these days. And those are the two types of plays that you can that still work really well, not just from an attention perspective, but also from an engagement perspective. So when you compare those types of formats to like an evergreen guide, you see a very different type of engagement because these stories resonate much more with your target audience. And a key to that is to figure out not just who your target audience is, but also seeing how you can gather more information about what your target audience cares about. And that's where we can use AI in a very, very efficient way, because you have a lot of conversations typically between the company and prospects, for example, between sales and prospects, but also customer support or customer success or market research from the product organization or from marketing, as it should happen, but rarely does. And so with AI, you can parse the transcripts of these conversations and then ask questions like, hey, what are some of the problems that the target audience mentions? What are some of the alternatives that they mention? What are some of the goals that they try to achieve? How do they see our product, et cetera, et cetera? And that is a very strong qualitative indicator for what types of topics you want to target, rather than starting with the keyword research first and seeing, oh, this has 5,000 monthly searches versus 200, so we're going to prioritize it this way.
Yeah, that's super interesting what you said as well about those two types of content, with the data heavy pieces and having that first party data that no one else has and presenting it in a way which was much more visual and either confirms or denies like a commonly held belief, but the core of that being data. And then secondly, personable, authoritative voices. And this is exactly what we're seeing in the digital PR space. So long gone are the days where you could just write a puff piece that was like of some interest. It needs to be data, which journalists love, or an authoritative voice. So I think that's sort of telling us the content that is in demand in the age of AI. So in that context, let's talk about the future, or Kevin Indig's view of the future of search. Yeah,
there's a lot to say. Any specific focus point, or do you just want me to just start kind of framing this?
Well, let's start with Google then, and how small businesses should view Google over the next 5 years, and what you think is going to look like.
Yeah, so for small businesses, much more of a, if we're talking about local business, obviously local SEO and maps, all that kind of stuff. The good thing is that there's no good competitor to Google Maps. Sure, you have Apple Maps, but
which is rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. Not maybe the navigation and stuff is good, but Google Maps is just way further ahead with all the reviews and all the other information that they have. So good times there. Obviously, very different game than a small SaaS company or a small e-commerce company. I would say maybe much more broadly for small companies. There is this. I think one thing that I'm seeing on Google that kind of transcends from marketing in general is that small companies need to find their small niches even more so, right? So you can still do really well on Google, you can still do well in search and LLMs, all that kind of stuff, but it's just so much more important to figure out what the small piece of the market is that you can dominate, and then how to position yourself accordingly. I see way too many, so sometimes I work with small startups, and I see way too many of them trying to position them to themselves as like a competitor to the incumbent, right? Like, yeah, we're going up against, Uber or Airbnb, or it's like, maybe you should aim a little lower. I mean, long-term, your vision can be that, but it's much more important to find the small piece of the market that you can dominate that is still viable for your business. And then once you've done that, then you can expand from there. And so that also transcends to search in terms of the keywords you target, or in terms of the content you create, or the lead generation tools. And I don't see that changing over the next couple of years. I think that's even more important as Google puts such a higher emphasis on brands, and as especially for the large search terms, Google shows so many more SERP features these days, and it's so much harder to actually get traffic from them. So I think there's a lot to be said about the long tail. And I also see that with consumer behavior shifting, in a sense that consumers or searchers ask longer questions, it's much more likely that they are looking for something specific. So what I mean is, classic search, say pre-AI overviews and pre-ChatGPT was very fuzzy. It was very broad, right? People search much more for for short head keywords because Google wasn't good at understanding the long tail. Now with LLMs, whether it's AI overviews on Google or LLMs in the sense of ChatGPT, Perplexity, and co, people ask longer questions because they get better results. As a result, companies need to be much more focused on that specific long tail, right? So if you're a small company and you focus correctly on your smallest part of the market, that means you want to figure out what are all the long tail searches that are relevant for that piece of the market, and what are all the things that people are searching, because they can search so much more precisely, right? They ask longer questions, they can better express what they want, so they're not reliant on starting at the top of the funnel and then working their way through. They do that probably on ChatGPT or on Google, and then they ask a very specific question, and that's where you need to be present. And that's also where small businesses can very much compete, because they have a very dedicated, specific offering compared to the large incumbent who kind of needs to offer everything.
Are the keyword research tools capturing these longer search terms? Like, is Ahrefs, or where would be a good place to go? Customer interviews?
It's a mix. Yeah, sorry to cut you off there, Nick. But yeah, it's a mix. It's very hard to capture these long search terms, and sometimes also hard to track them because Google Search Console, doesn't report as much data anymore. But anyway, that's a different problem. That's why it's so important to talk to your target audience or prospects, and then surface these gems out of the transcripts with AI, right? I see like one big trend, and maybe this has started a couple of years ago already, is for marketers to go back to actually talking to the customers. Everybody says they do it, and nobody does this. I'm telling you right now, 9.5 of 10 clients will pretend that they talk to customers, and then I ask them, okay, so where are some of the transcripts? Where's the research? And if you're lucky, you get an outdated deck from like 5 years ago, right? So one critical thing, even though we're technical marketers and performance marketing, all the good stuff, you need to go back to at least talk to a couple of customers a month. Ideally, you talk to a couple a week. And then again, use modern tools like AI to then surface the gems, and then you can quantify it, right? So we spoke to 100 customers last quarter. Cool. What's the commonality between all of them? What are they all saying? You can literally export the transcripts, use AI to ask that question, and it's usually really good at finding these types of answers. And then you use it as a qualitative signal to inform your marketing strategy. And
do you suggest actually picking up the phone and calling customers?
There's different ways. So phone works sometimes. Any type of video conference tool is really good. Or if you can, if they can record a Loom, it depends on like who you're targeting, right? But obviously you want to make it easy for them. And what I found is that the magic is really in the questions you ask. Of course, depends on who you pick, right? You can pick customers, you can pick prospects, you can pick people who don't know you yet. So that all of these have different benefits. But then the question is, what do you ask them? And so you want to, there's like some basic stuff around positioning and messaging, again, like how would you phrase your problem? What are the alternatives? What have you tried? Why do you consider us? Do you even consider us? Do you know us? All this kind of stuff. So really understanding the problems that your target audience faces deeply, which means understanding the market deeply. But then from there, you can also ask about more specific preferences, like, do you, do you prefer your expense management to, do you care about the brand? Do you care about the company? Or do you just want the cheapest feature? Like, what are your specific consumer preferences? So there's a long journey ahead. But again, I'm telling you, everybody who listens to this, you're probably not doing customer research, and they're probably not talking to your customers. So most important point is to just start and start wherever you can. If it means one a month, then just do that and then build on top and refine it. So that, by the way, also means that your ideal marketing team or SEO team might look a little different than 5 years ago, right? So maybe you don't need 5 writers, right? Maybe you need 2 writers and then 1 analyst and then 1 researcher and a designer or something like that. So the suggestions and recommendations that I make for the team composition specifically and the skills and capabilities looks very different than a couple of years ago.
That's really interesting. And that can actually be quite a hard thing to, especially for smaller business owners, to get to grips with, isn't it? Is changing that team dynamic, letting people go and hiring new people to do new roles. But we've got to adapt or die, I suppose. Okay, so we are definitely living in an era where Google dominance is somewhat waning. They still rule the roost in terms of search, but we are having to adapt and optimize outside of just Google now? Voice search is obviously on the rise, and then we have the LLMs as well. So we want to appear in. How can we optimize everywhere, and should we? Or should we figure out where we're appearing and try and stay optimizing and appearing there? What's your view?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm working actually on a memo about this right now. So it's very much top of mind. And so here's how I want to think about that. Companies typically have a channel that pulls them forward. Most of the time it's advertising, right? Advertising channels have become really good, whether we're talking about Alphabet, PMax, or Meta, or even TikTok and other platforms. But advertising has become really good. And it's very easy to fall in love and get very addicted to advertising. The challenge is, what do you do when you need to cut budgets or when ads are becoming more expensive? A lot of CPCs over the last couple of years have grown significantly in cost for the same returns. And so the way you want to think about it is in paid, earned, and owned channels. So you want to build a safety net for yourself with earned and owned channels. And the question then, of course, is what is a good channel mix and how do you prioritize certain channels or things to do? Generally, outside of advertising, you want to have at least one earned and one owned channel. So earned could be SEO, it could be YouTube content, it could be maybe Reddit, it could be content marketing, those kind of things. Owned is usually stuff like email, maybe WhatsApp, maybe your native app, right? So an environment where you have a direct line, a direct relationship to your customers or target audience, and you're not dependent on an algorithm that decides whether you are visible or not. And so as a small business, next to the channel that pulls you forward, which is most likely advertising, you want to build proficiency and traction in an earned channel like SEO, and then build up an owned channel like email. So that this SEO plus email combo works really, really well, because even, when a Google update launches and for whatever reason you might lose some visibility, you still have a significant amount of people in your email list, right? And by the way, a lot of companies approach this with way too much of a cookie cutter mindset where they just like send out promotions and stuff. Like email is a really good engagement channel. And there's a lot of stuff you can do right or wrong. But then when you grow, you want to think about, okay, what other earned channels can I now add on top? YouTube, I think, is a really good one because, and I'm doing this, by the way, for my own newsletter right now, because you can shift your focus from SEO to YouTube and say, okay, now every content we publish first goes out as a video, and then from that, we're going to create a blog article and maybe some, shorts or something along these lines. So to stay efficient, you want to think about what is the carryover effect from one earned channel to another. YouTube or video to SEO is much easier, by the way, than SEO to YouTube. It can work also, but just has a different type of flow and a different kind of responsibilities you need to juggle. And so you want to step by step think about where can I repurpose content the easiest and the best to carry over into other channels. So you can also repurpose a YouTube video, for example, for your email list and say, okay, maybe we take a part of the YouTube video transcript and wrap this up in an email. Maybe we simplify this, or maybe we answer a question that the YouTube video raised in the email. So you can be creative here, but the key is to think about what are the paid, earned, and owned channels, and how can I make my life easier by creating content once and then repurposing it across the board, but not in a lazy way, right? We're not talking about paying $5 for, like a Fiverr freelancer and they're making it like being lazy here. You need to invest the work, but that's the most efficient and effective way to grow.
And did you mention Reddit as an earned channel? Is that one you mentioned? Yep. Okay. Can you explain how that could be an actual strategy for earned?
Yeah, totally. Reddit is all about engagement, right? I think the flaw is to think that you can drive a lot of referral traffic from Reddit. By the way, same from YouTube. Like these are not most platforms for the matter. Their incentive is not to drive users out. Their incentive is to keep users in. And so if your target audience is on Reddit, it's very fruitful to engage with them. And it can go as far as creating a subreddit. I have a big customer right now. We're working on exactly that Reddit strategy. And so you don't always need your own subreddit, but you can do it. It has pros and cons, but there's different formats to engage your audience with, right? The most popular one is probably an AMA, but you can also do it behind the scenes, or maybe, like some insights, some of the data stories you can also publish on Reddit. Most important is that you're not trying to sell your giving, and you're engaging. So you're active in the comments. You will probably need some customer support for this as well, because people will probably complain or bring some of these problems up that they have. But if you do it well, I've seen a lot of examples where you can actually turn a complainer into an advocate, right? If they complain about, I don't know, like I got charged even though I sent the product back, or it's not working, it's broken, right? And then you turn it around on them and you over service them, right? You sent them, 5 new products, or you sent them a special or a handwritten letter or something. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, look at how far beyond they went for me. And then they become an ambassador. By the way, you'll find examples of whole companies that were just built on Reddit. But the important thing to understand is that unless we're talking about advertising, the key is not to get people away or to advertise your product, but to engage and start being in control of the conversation. That also really helps, by the way, with the SEO, because Reddit is one of the most visible sites in the search results now. And, especially if you have a subreddit, one of the benefits is you can start your own threads. And so if you see, for example, that your subreddit or a specific thread for one of your target keywords pops up prominently, and you either want to control the conversation or there's something that you, want to push further down, then you just simply open another thread, you get very active there, and you have a higher chance of replacing that other thread that you didn't want there in the first place, or just being in control of the narrative, right? So there are lots of ways to be strategic. And the biggest misconception is just, we're going to go on Reddit, we're going to post a bunch of links, we're going to get referral traffic that converts to customers.
My mind immediately went to Parasite SEO and trying to rank because Reddit is getting so much of the search right now.
Oh yeah, sure. And Parasite SEO happens, and I want to be realistic. Of course, there are lots of people who try to game it. The thing is, with AI, you can create posts and threads that appear to be human, and they're indistinguishable from AI, right? So that's just the reality. Good thing is that Reddit has a couple of antibodies that I think have a chance to prevent it from being flooded with spam in the next couple of years. One of them is karma. So obviously your karma decides, or it gives you more credibility. Downvotes and upvotes can really help. And then the moderators play a massive role, right? So if you seem overly promotional or spammy, many times you have a moderator that can kick you out. Now you can start subreddits yourself, and you can be the moderator and then run a Parasite SEO strategy. There are absolutely ways to bypass this. I will say though that I think the amount of Reddit manipulation is a lot lower than many people think it actually is. It happens, yes. There's no perfect place, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it could be much, much worse.
Do you think this is a tactic which could work well for small businesses, local businesses, or is this got to be, because you don't really get like that locality on Reddit, do you? Or do you? I'm not a huge Reddit user.
Very rarely. I think as a local business, I would probably place my eggs in a different basket. I think Reddit is maybe something to experiment with once you're doing really, really well, but it's not the first channel top of mind. I think for local business, and I want to say I'm absolutely no expert in local. It's very not my forte, but I think that game of reviews, maps, having videos and images out there, maybe a bit of content to kind of showcase your business and who you are and what you do, I think that goes a much, much longer way than Reddit. There's sometimes cases where, you have like Reddit NYC and maybe somebody asks for what are the 10 best sushi restaurants in New York City, and maybe you are one of those, and then you can quote unquote present yourself to some degree, but I think these cases are rare.
Okay, one last thing on Reddit then. So for larger businesses, enterprise businesses, you mentioned that you could start your own subreddit or not. So that's one question. What are the pros and cons of that? And I would assume you would need to allocate like 1 or 2 team members to like be actively engaging continuously. And obviously the classic thing is, you don't want to sell, you need to deliver value. When do you sell? When do like these enterprise guys that you've got inside of Reddit continually offering value, how are you going to convert? Is that just all about what's in that person's like bio, the company URL and link, what they do? How do you convert that?
Yep. Yeah. So to start with the last question, you can sell when you're being asked to, right? So say you have an engaging thread with a couple of people on a post, and then at some point, they ask you, so what do you recommend? That's a great time to say, hey, look, here are 3 things I recommend. By the way, just I'm an employee of this company. Of course, I'm biased. Be super transparent and honest. That is very appreciated. And then maybe offer some alternatives. The good thing is that usually when you have a good job, when you have done a good job engaging a thread, people are much more likely to trust you and follow your specific recommendation. So even though you're saying, I'm biased, I'm working for this company, because you helped them out and because you made a good impression, they're still more likely to click on your link. And then also, sometimes you don't sell at all. And what you notice is that people found you on Reddit first through self-attribution. So when you ask them, hey, how did you find us or hear about us first, they might mention Reddit along the way. And that's a very common path. But in terms of the pros and cons for your own subreddit, the pros are obviously you're much more in control of the narrative. It's much easier to get visibility in Google search with specific posts that you open, and you're much more in control of the audience, right? So you get some audience insights now from Reddit when they are part of your subreddit. And so, there's just, you can just, for example, if you want to dominate a specific topic on Reddit, let's just say you're Atlassian and you want to dominate the topic of Agile on Reddit, and you open an Agile subreddit right now, now all of a sudden, if you can make that successful, you own that topic on Reddit, right? There's a high chance that people will join that specific subreddit when they search for the topic. So there's all sorts of benefits about being in control of the narrative, controlling what appears on Google, and having a first mover advantage. The cons are you obviously need dedicated staffing, as you already mentioned, Chris. I suggest usually you need at least a half-time position to engage, and then probably one full-time customer support or customer success person to cover for your subreddit and other subreddits. The reality is just that, is whether you are active on Reddit or not, there is a chance that your product is being discussed, and there is a very high chance that some people don't have a good experience, or you can never make everyone happy. So getting on top of that is usually a really good idea, but it's not something that you just do for like 1 hour a week. It's something that you need a full-time person on, and they need to understand the Reddit etiquette and develop their scripts and all that kind of stuff, and that can be very, very fruitful. So that's where I recommend companies to start, 1.5 FTE or full-time employees. And that's the downside, right? Also, if you kind of go dark on the subreddit, if you open one and get some traction, and then at some point say you don't want to continue anymore, it's not a huge risk, but it also doesn't look the greatest. It can have some side effects, so just be aware of that. But again, I personally think that at some point, the pros outweigh the cons, and a great way to approach this is to test into Reddit with two things. One is advertising. Just see, is my audience on Reddit at all? Do my ads get any clicks and traction and customers? Mm-hmm. And then two, start getting active on Reddit without your own subreddit, right? Just see what is the subreddit that's most relevant for my audience right now, become active there, see how that goes. And if that's successful, then you start your own town and you bring people over.
Okay. Well, I've got some karma, so I might dive in after this.
Yeah, it's worth a lot.
All right, let's talk real quick about the future of search. So Chris mentioned he thought that there's a lot of places you can focus on now, but that Google is still the dominant player. Do you think that will remain? Do you think Google has enough data that they will be the dominant player? Do you think some portion of search is going to move to different platforms? How do you think that shapes out over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so very broadly, it's tougher. It's Google's race to lose. They have the technology, the people, the dominance, the brand recognition, and all the ingredients you need to bake a really nice wedding cake. The challenge is the inventor's dilemma, right? ChatGPT or OpenAI and Perplexity just don't have the same dependencies that a Google has. They're gaining rapidly in brand recognition, and they provide a really good product, right? So one thing that's very interesting is when you ask people on social network, like LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, or even just in person, if you ask them, do you think that, like ChatGPT is a threat to Google? A lot of them will say, no way. Like Google is so established, biggest company, blah, 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 so much money and people and whatnot. And then you ask them, have you used ChatGPT more in the last 3 months? And have you used it more than Google? And then a lot of them will say yes. So there's this disconnect, right? We think it's a bias. It's an availability bias. We think that nothing can kick Google off the throne. But, if you think about the runtime of most incumbents, it's maybe a couple decades. And Google has been sitting on the throne for 2.5 decades now. So I don't think Google will die. I think Google will be relevant for a long, long time. And if I had to put a number behind it, I would say for at least another decade. But that exclusive dominance, that exclusive monopoly for Google, that is fading very rapidly. And the reason is that we're collectively getting to the next step or evolution of search, right? Classic search was a web index, ranked results, all that stuff. The next step is LLMs, right? And you can see it because Google shows AI overviews at the top of the search results, right? So if they themselves wouldn't believe that that's the future, then why do they do that? They clearly do. And so that's a place where the cards are somewhat newly shuffled and where Google faces headwinds, for example, from a legal point of view, right? They have a couple of lawsuits that could significantly restrict them in their competitive advantage when it comes to AI search. And so that's why, again, I think Google is going to remain relevant for at least another decade. So if you're thinking about investing in SEO right now, it's still a good time. A lot of LLM answers and AI answers are still heavily rooted in search. That will change. But that's not going to happen overnight. And consumer adoption, even of new technology, is also not happening overnight. You can look at the iPhone, which was clearly superior to anything when it came out. Google too, by the way, it took Google about 3 years to pass Yahoo and Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves and whatnot. So this will take time. This is a slow transition. But I think Google's chances of staying a monopoly and keeping its dominant position in the next 10 years are low. And I think it's much more likely that either one or several other challengers like an open AI can gain a significant amount of market share in that new playing field. But again, we're talking about different types of products, right? Classic search versus AI search. We're talking about different localities. So when you go to Silicon Valley, I think you find a lot more ChatGPT adopters than when you go to the middle of nowhere, right? In I don't know, Germany or something. And it's important to understand that these transitions happen slowly in years, even though it feels like they already happened yesterday and everybody's already on LLM. So what I advise companies is keep investing in SEO, but also don't forget about LLMs. I think there's a chance to get a first mover advantage. I think it's important to pay attention to that space and understand it. It's almost like the early days in SEO when we tried to figure out how this works and reverse engineer it and develop tactics and share data. And so I personally am very excited about this. But yeah, I think Google being dominant in 10 years, I would bet money that this is not the case.
I'm curious just on this, we'll wrap this part up after this, but how important is it, like what is actually installed on your device? So I use Safari on my iPhone, it's installed. I use Chrome on my MacBook, but that's only because of add-ons. A lot of the population that you mentioned that is maybe not using LLMs now, if it comes pre-installed on their iPhone and it's made a bigger deal and it's easy to use, you can see a lot more adoption coming that way. Is that like a possibility that because they're pre-installed on iPhones that we start to move towards that?
It's hugely important. And I can tell you exactly how important it is. It's about $25 billion important because that's the money that Google pays. Contracts, yeah, exactly. Exclusive distribution agreements. That's what Google pays. And a lot of that goes to Apple just to be the pre-installed solution. Now, that's going away. It has already gone away in Europe. And we see more adoption of other search engines in Europe now that Apple is forced to show choice screens. And by the way, Android too. So yes, it absolutely matters. Huge advantage. A big advantage of Google is just how known it is and its brand, right? How established it is. And you can see that because there are studies that completely remove the design and brand of a search engine and just show the results. And they show the results from different search engines. And the conclusion that they come to is that there's no difference, that there's barely a qualitative advantage. Maybe Google is a few percent better, but we're talking about a small margin. And so a huge part of Google's dominance is its brand. But of course, they got there with a superior product. Don't get me wrong, right? It's not just that they do good marketing. They were superior for a very long time. But when you compare against Bing, and there will be examples where Google's results are much better than Bing's. But when you have these double-blinded studies, they often come out they come to a conclusion that there's no real difference in the quality of search results.
I was playing with the Data Studio and the new model that Google released on its experimental model. And I really liked what you said earlier. It's their race to lose. Is it not fair to say, and forgive my ignorance if anything of what I say is incorrect, but this new model from Google is like 2 billion times better than the next model, and their processing costs with the release of their new chips and all that. Is it going to be who controls the most amount of data and who can process it the cheapest is going to win the LLM race? And is Google not perfectly positioned to do that?
Google is perfectly positioned to do that. Absolutely. They have all the ingredients, as you mentioned, from processing and compute power, right? Think of the data centers that they have, the chips that they develop themselves to run optimally or run their models optimally, to the fact that they're the inventors of transformers also says something. Again, this comes back to something that we said earlier, which is this progression of companies that stand mostly in their own way because of their size, right? I think one of the biggest challenges that Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet, has is to just get things out and get things done. I think you have so many incredibly smart people at Google, and they're not blind to all of this, right? They're seeing this. The funny thing about disruption theory is that the incumbents, they're usually not blind to the punch, right? In boxing, the punch you don't see coming knocks you out. They very much see the punch coming. They're trying to lean up against it, but they stand in their own way for various reasons, right? Sometimes it's their size, sometimes it's stuff like legal and procurement, sometimes it's just the self-imposed rules that they have. And so that's why I think that it's, for Google, the question is, what are the self-imposed prisons that they build that stand their own way? One of them could be advertising, right? So Google's shareholders, so the CEO is basically employed by the shareholders, more or less, right? The shareholders expect about 20% year-over-year annual growth from Google, which is at this size crazy, but they still managed to pull it off. Now, to be successful in this new AI search, you might have to disrupt some of your advertising business models, because it's just not working the same way, right? A new format, like text ads and videos, just don't work the same way. So you have to find a new ad format that maybe at the beginning is cheaper or cannibalizes your existing advertising. And so that is kind of the challenge, right? They might just not make the same moves because they need to keep the growth rate alive, and that's driven by the classic formats, whether it's ranked results or a specific ad format, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to be their challenge, and that's why you see them launching all these fragmented products like Notebook LM, which is fantastic, right? Or different video models and all that kind of stuff. So that's the freedom that the challengers have, like OpenAI, and that's why they have a high likelihood of succeeding. They don't have the same constraints, but it's going to be very, very interesting to see. Also in terms of the models, for example, I'm not sure if better models, quote unquote better, we have to define what better means, but larger models, if they guarantee success, or is it more the kind of developing small models that can solve specific tasks? Is it going to be the inference part? So how well can these models reason? Is it going to be to invest in energy and compute at the right amount of time, at the right point of time? That's a huge constraint right now, is compute, right? Just having enough energy and chip power to run all these models and train new models. So the challenge is that Google has 100 choices to make, and each of them could be the one choice that they made wrong that then means that they lose the race, right? They might invest in energy too late. They might overinvest in chips. So maybe they buy too many chips and for whatever reason they don't need them, which is unlikely but possible. Or they're too aggressive with the answers, and then now they don't send out enough traffic to the open web anymore. So the web is less incentivized to create content. So there's all these failure points. And the bigger you are and the more market share you have, the easier it is to make a wrong decision, which goes back to managers being scared to make the wrong decision and lose their job or kind of tank the company.
It's a big decision here. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot that could go wrong. Kevin, this has been an absolutely fantastic talk. We've gone over an hour. I know we had you booked for 1 hour. So I think this is the perfect place to wrap it up. So thanks for coming on. For people who want to connect with you, where can we send them?
Yeah, sure. Two avenues. One is my newsletter called Growth Memo, so www.growth-memo.com. The other one is my personal site, www.kevin-indig.com, or just, you should be able to Google Kevin Indig and find most of my stuff.
Your content on LinkedIn is great, so I'd recommend there as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here, Kevin. It's been awesome.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. This was fun.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1,
And that wraps up this episode of Market Movers, Building Brands and Links with Linkify. Big thanks to our parent company, Linkify, the wizards behind turning ambitious businesses into standout brands. Hit up our website at linkify.io and take the first steps towards brand greatness. Big shout out to Fame for making this podcast possible. Thanks for listening, folks. Stick around for more insights in our next episode. Catch you later.